Bitcoin meetup that might not have otherwise had enough motivation to come along and learn about Bitcoin, and particularly learn about its unique application to, I think, the things that a lot of us care about, particularly after the last 2 years, and that's the extent to which it enables freedom and personal self-sovereignty and all of those things that we all care about, and which many people in our society seem to have cast aside and considered almost to be a negative thing, which is very sad to see. So tonight we'll be, obviously, many of you will have heard of Zuby and met him. So Zuby has become very well known recently for his common sense takes on things that, I think that's the George Orwell quote that I mentioned in the write-up for this meetup, is that when speaking the truth becomes a revolutionary act, to paraphrase that quote there. So, and that's what we're really seeing, of seeing just simply speaking the truth and common sense. And a lot of Bitcoiners identify this, because to sort of get Bitcoin, you have to sort of almost be willing to entertain a rather heterodox point of view against the mainstream, because the mainstream wants to tell you that dollars are the be-all and end-all, and this new form of money that came out is a complete paradigm shift that you have to be willing to think against the herd and think differently to be willing to embrace. And so that's why Bitcoiners find a lot of common ground, not just with money and with Bitcoin, but with a lot of these other beliefs, particularly as they pertain to freedom and self-sovereignty and all of those other things. So Zuby, if you'd like to come up, we can introduce you. Now we've also got, yes, give a round of applause. Now, where's Hass? Have we got Hass? Hass is here. So Hass is our Bitcoin mining specialist and dollar cost averaging advocate. And up until recently, head of research at Monochrome Asset Management. So they're a firm that's brought the first Bitcoin ETF to Australia. Is that right? Is it attempting to bring? Attempting to bring. Okay, it's still on the go. And of course we have Chris. Where's Chris? Here we are. Chris is round of applause. So Chris, I think you had the first one of the early Bitcoin wallet vendor companies, and first in Australia, and you're now involved in immersion mining. Yeah. So amongst many other things. So tonight as well, I also mentioned that we're doing this in conjunction with Blockchain Sydney, and I'm grateful to Rob. Does a lot of work scouting out these venues, and so he's so it's thanks to the Blockchain Sydney crew that we've got this venue tonight. So thank you to those guys. And so I'll just pass over to Bradley to make a few remarks on behalf of that group.
Thank you very much, John. Bradley Hughes, co-organiser with Rob Linton of Blockchain Sydney, along with Milen Narinoff. Milen, wave as well. There we go. So Rob's down the back. He's got the new Blade Runner cap on. Excellent cap. Love it. So it's great to be here and have you all here. We are excited to do this co-hosted event, with Blockchain Sydney, and to have such an illustrious guest, Zuby, here for us this evening. We have long had some discussions about the philosophical differences between Bitcoin and everything else. So, as some of you may have heard the term shitcoins that gets put around a bit. So you can look at this whole industry as a diverse array of ideas and attempts at discovering the future of finance, the future of digital money, the future of self-sovereignty. Bitcoin Sydney, all about Bitcoin. Highly recommend you learn more about Bitcoin. Everyone should. I consider Bitcoin to be your financial fortress. Everything else is like the marketplace, the town square, your metaverses, your NFTs, DeFi, all of that, casinos, whatever you want to call it. There's a vast array of functionality and projects and applications out there for DeFi and lending and all these sorts of things. But at the core of it, if you want self-sovereign, hard money, Bitcoin, your keys, your crypto, or your Bitcoin in fact. Yes. So look, for the dichotomy between the groups, we've been friends, we know each other for a long time, we're friendly, we appreciate each other. Blockchain Sydney is basically everything else, and I see many familiar faces here that come to our meetups, and it's exciting for us to put on this joint event tonight. So I will just briefly mention that at the end of the night I'll give a bit more update on what's coming up, but the key points, the 19th of October we have Kin, and we also have a metaverse application presenting around assets in the metaverse. Kin is a digital currency, a token on Solana that's aiming to be, it's used in play-to-earn games and various other applications. It's aiming to be a very easy to use, embedded in applications. They're launching their new branding, they're launching where they're up to. It's going to be quite exciting. Matthew Hannam and another speaker with Matthew, I'm sorry I don't recall his name right now. That's going to be great. So we'll see you on October the 19th, and the other one's the Christmas party. So we do have that locked in now, December the 13th, so keep that in mind in your calendar. Aurora Rooftop Hotel, sponsored by FTX. It's going to be a great night. Come along, network, have a great time. And I'll pass back to John now without further ado for the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you, Bradley. There we go. 1, 2, 3, there we go. There we go, perfect. All right, well look, I thought I might, what we're going to do tonight is, you might have noticed there's a couple of things stuck up on the pillars there. That's a link to a website called Slido. I don't know if you guys have used that before, but it's pretty simple. Go to that website, pop in the code, and you can submit your questions. And so I can see those come up on the screen here, and I can put those to our panel. In the meantime, I will kick off with a few questions just to sort of set the tone of the evening and get things going, and then I'll basically be referring to that, so it'll be you guys running the show from there. So what I thought I would start out with is ask maybe the panel what brought them to Bitcoin? What was their initial, what primed them to really grasp Bitcoin and get into it and find it so interesting? Well, since we may as well start in the order in which we are, so I'll start with Has.
Yeah, so for me, I suppose it was like my international upbringing, and especially like the third world aspect of that upbringing, and like having some history, watching my parents' money hyperinflated away or seized by the government, as a young family in Lebanon. One of the reasons we migrated to Australia, and secondly, I've always been very environment and sustainability oriented person, surprisingly enough, and I quickly realized that if we want true sustainability and like to save the world, we have to save and fix the money, and Bitcoin is here to save us. So that's a very brief background of what brought me to Bitcoin.
Hello everybody. Okay, so the way I first heard about Bitcoin, so taking it back a little bit, some of you may know, some of you won't know, but I'm actually a computer science graduate. I studied computer science at Oxford University, like most rappers do. And so I've always been interested in tech and technology. I think I first heard about Bitcoin actually relatively early. I want to say maybe around 2011, 2012, I first heard the word. And initially, I didn't do any research whatsoever. I thought it was like some in-game video game currency or some PayPal type thing or whatever. I didn't look into it. In 2017, that's when I really started to look at it. I heard the word more times, and I had a couple friends, one friend in particular named Kelly, who was investing in it and posting on Facebook about all the sick gains that he was making. And something spurred me to just go, what is this Bitcoin thing? I've heard about this for a few years. And I just went on Google and I searched it, I watched some YouTube videos, and I was sold on the concept very quickly as someone who's pretty libertarian minded and freedom oriented. The concept of a digital currency that could be used all around the world without a middleman, that has a scarce supply, and which is essentially unhackable. I was like, cool, sign me up. So I was sold on it very quickly, and I dove in headfirst, perhaps a little bit too aggressively. I'm sure you guys remember, some of you will remember the end of 2017 from an investment standpoint. Probably wasn't the best time to go balls deep into it. But yeah, I had this baptism by fire, and during that whole period, 2018, 2019 bear market, I used that time to actually learn more about what it was. Initially, I was drawn in by the concept, but I spent more time every single day just doing a little bit more research, following certain people on Twitter, reading a lot of Bitcoin-oriented books and cryptocurrency books. And as time has gone on, I mean, it's now been about almost approaching 5 years, which is kind of crazy. And the more time I spend in it and the more I learn about it, the more clear it becomes to me that Bitcoin is going to do for money what I think the internet has done for information. So that's been a summary of my journey there.
Yeah, round of applause. I especially agree with that last point you made, what Bitcoin's going to do to money, which is what the internet did to information. Hello everyone, my name's Chris. Many of you probably see my face around here before. Yeah, thank you, my one fan. I have an interesting Bitcoin journey. So I first learnt about it in 2011, but I didn't really look into it per se. It was just a means to acquire particular things. It wasn't until about 2015 where I kind of circled back to it and thought, okay, this thing's still going, it's not a scam, and whilst that thing's still going, there's more stuff happening too. So I actually picked up the white paper and read that, and I thought, okay, I wish I did this 5 years earlier. It was kind of from that point onwards that I went, you know, as you would say, balls deep into the rabbit hole, and I started my first startup, which was called Coinstop, which is still going today. It's a hardware wallet reseller here in Australia, so helping people secure their Bitcoins in a safe fashion. And then I've kind of just been going crazy with it ever since, with multiple different startups, and now working in some Bitcoin mining areas, looking at doing some Bitcoin events. It's just consumed my life, as it does to, I'm sure, many of you here, which is why you are here. But yeah, that's kind of my summarised Bitcoin journey.
Thanks, guys. I suppose I should mention, for me it was something whereby I've always been the sort of person who's liked to sort of understand how things work, and so one of the things that primed me is that I'd seen it, I wanted to understand what money was and how money worked, and most of you will realise that you never really get taught that. It's almost a bit of a dark art, isn't it? And I think we've since learned there's a very good reason why we're not taught about the way money really works, because you just realise it was a complete scam. And so, I don't know if you guys, anyone's ever seen this documentary, but it came out in the 90s, and it used to get circulated around on VHS and the very early, MPEGs on the internet, before torrents even. But it's a thing called The Money Masters, and it almost looks like one of those conspiracy theory documentaries, but in fact it's not that at all. It's very, very thoroughly researched and detailed, and it's basically a guy giving the entire history of the way money works and basically lays the whole thing down. So that in the back of my mind, and then sort of seeing Bitcoin, I suppose, again, I think a lot of us don't get it on the first hit. We think it's like Zuby mentioned, it must be some sort of in-game currency, like it's literally some kind of thing, like just some fiat money that a private person made up, which is very much like what a lot of altcoins actually really are. But anyway, that's what primed me, and I think, I guess, got me interested in it. So, and I think that's, I think we all have different things that have given us the primed us anyway for embracing it. So I wanted to ask next, if you had some concerns about, obviously that's what this tonight's about, the way the world's going, what's happened the last 2 years. How do we think, what's the consent, what does the panel think, that how can Bitcoin help with that? Who would like to start? We can go in the same order? Or, yeah.
So times are tough. I think everyone acknowledges that. But tough times pass, just like good times pass. And what Bitcoin helps you to do is to weather that storm until it passes. Bitcoin's going to be something that's, I feel, going to be with us forever. I believe Bitcoin has already won a major battle in the wars of money, and for me personally, I'm using Bitcoin as my bulwark to get me through these tough times, because tough times are coming. If you think it's bad, everything can get worse. But Bitcoin is like it's your beacon of truth. It's your light in the dark, and that's why I'm always bullish on Bitcoin and what it can do, both at the individual level and social and global level as well.
Yeah, last couple of years have been heavy. I'll be honest, I did not think that I would be in Australia right now or any time. I was seeing what was happening in this country, and I'll be real with you guys, I'd written it off, but I'm glad you did as well. But I'm glad that I'm happy to be here. I'm happy that I was invited to come out for multiple events. The past 2.5 years, as far as I'm concerned, have been truly catastrophic, especially for the Western world. Especially for nations that are supposed to value individual rights, democracy, liberty, freedom, all these words that we like to say and claim our societies are based on, whether you're in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, USA, Western Europe, Canada, it all got thrown in the trash, right? With reckless abandon. And I think that we have fundamentally I think our societies have fundamentally changed in a permanent way. And I'm not trying to be a doomer here at all, because I think with those changes will always come a lot of opportunities. And I think that everyone gathered here, right here, is here for a reason. But in terms of specifics, I think that something that happened over the past couple years is that modern Western society was introduced to genuine authoritarianism. Some people may have thought it was justified, or maybe they did initially and their minds changed. Some people still think it's justified and think it should still be going on, but I think our entire lifetimes, unless you've grown up in another country where there's been some real type of conflict, I think our entire lives, we've just never seen that. We read about it in history, we see authoritarianism and totalitarianism in other countries, and we're always like, well, that's not the West, right? Like, that's not something that can happen here, and it's never going to go that far. And I think people, if you remember just where we were this time last year and how insane things were, things got really, really far. So I think with Bitcoin, it's become even more obvious how important it is to have self-sovereignty over your money, over your life, and to have an asset which you are in control of. I'm sure some of you saw what happened in Canada. It was just earlier this year with the trucker protests where people were getting their bank accounts frozen and things like that, not for breaking any laws, for protesting. Again, sort of thing you'd think would happen under the CCP in China, or perhaps in a Middle Eastern authoritarian regime, and that's real life. So I think Bitcoin, in terms of its value, I think that the more people realize and wake up to some of these things and some of these possibilities, I think it just plays into why a technology like Bitcoin is so important, why decentralization is so important, why self-sovereignty is so important. If someone hasn't woken up to that to some degree over the past 2.5 years, then I don't really know what else would wake them up to it, but yeah, keep stacking.
I would +1 to everything you just said there. The one thing that I would add, without repeating, because I agree with everything that you just mentioned, is the one thing that Bitcoin does give us, and obviously everything right now, especially financially around the world, but in other areas too, is quite uncertain. It's very turmoil, you don't know what's going to happen next, and it, like Has said, it's probably going to get worse before it gets better, and I don't mean to be a doomer either. But I think that might just be the reality of the world that we live in at the moment. With the traditional finance system, there's a lot of unknowns, and it's really hard to kind of plan ahead when you don't know what the rules are. And the one thing that Bitcoin does is it publishes all the rules for everyone to abide by. And that's the one thing that I really like, amongst many things, about Bitcoin, is that it's all known. You can read all 11 pages of the white paper and you know everything that has to happen. Whereas, when you've got a Fed Reserve or a government, you don't know what they're going to do next. They might print a few more billion, they might trillion. Yeah, I mean, where do they stop, right? They might increase the interest rates. You just don't really know how to plan 6 months ahead, let alone years, decades ahead. And the one thing Bitcoin does is it gives you certainty. We know exactly how many Bitcoin are going to be in existence at any point in time, forever. We know when the last block's going to be mined. We know quite accurately how much Bitcoin is going to be in existence in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 33 days. Like, we've got a pretty good grasp of that. We can't say the same for the fiat world. We don't know how much fiat's going to exist in 1 week, let alone 10 years. And so if they keep printing money and devaluing and inflating everything, it's really hard to know how to act as an individual in that ecosystem. So that's one thing I really, really like about Bitcoin, is it gives you that certainty. It gives you some peace of mind that the rules aren't just going to change tomorrow or next week or next year. And so you can act accordingly through that.
Thanks, Chris. Well, that's actually a good segue into another topic which I know that you've spoken on before, Zuby, and that's the threat of central bank digital currencies, which I know that our government is trialling something at the moment. I'm sure that it's something that's been trialled in a number of governments all around the world. Do you want to comment further on that, the threat, the implications and the threat of central bank digital currencies as opposed to being on a Bitcoin standard, for example?
Yeah, I think it's. I think the potential for it is extremely dystopian. I mean, having a currency which is programmable by the government or a central bank, and they can control how you spend it, there's no privacy, they can switch it off if they think that you have committed some wrong thing, or you're trying to buy something that they don't think you should be buying. You know, this is a concept, just like everything over the past few years, it's going to be sold and marketed under the banners of safety and security. Because safety and security are the one thing that the two things really, that we can put them together. Safety and security, that's the only thing that the average person will trade freedom and liberty for. It's really hard to get people to trade freedom and liberty for something else, but if you tell them, hey, this is safer and it's more secure for you and for society and for the greater good, dangerous words, then, you know, that's how it's going to be marketed. It's not going to be marketed as, oh, you know, we want to have increased control and take over some of your privacy and have more surveillance and so on. But that's really what it's erode down to. I mean, I'm sure many of you are familiar with China's social credit score system. So we're not talking about something that is purely theoretical here. This is something that already exists in the world. In fact, in the most populous country in the world, if you put a central bank digital currency on top of that type of system, then they can just, literally with the switch of a button, control your financial transactions to say, okay, this person is not allowed to transact. You try to buy at the bar, your car is declined. You try to get a taxi, card declined. You try to fly out the country, card declined. Oh, and also they can see exactly where you are each time you try to do that. So I think this concept of central bank digital currencies is a gateway to not just authoritarianism, I'd say outright totalitarianism. And I think once that genie is out the bottle, it would be extremely difficult to put back in. So I think that's something that absolutely has to be resisted.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, Has, because I think this is something that Has can speak on, as you might have come across it through your research at Monochrome, but if there's anything that distinguishes Bitcoin, I think, from, and I don't include Brad and Rob's group in this, Blockchain Sydney, but certainly some of the other peak industry bodies, is that they are literally, excited about this stuff. So if you take, for example, I'll name them, Blockchain Australia is the peak industry body for blockchain, is frequently seen, having central bankers spruiking their digital currencies, the prospect of a central bank digital currency on their various events and shows, and they're excited about that. So, whereas of course, as we've just heard here, we couldn't be any more horrified by the idea. So, and it says something about a lot of these blockchain things, in that it gives central authorities that sort of control. So I think maybe that's something you might want to comment on there, Has.
One thing, like
Ethereum, for example.
I'll avoid that topic, but what I'll say is that I don't think CBDCs are going to be marketed to us. They are going to be imposed upon us, and then it's on us to harden ourselves and have a self-sovereign alternative to the CBDC. Because I have no doubt at all, like. If you thought, Trudeau was happy when he shut down the truckers, do you know how much easier it would have been to shut down the truckers if you had a CBDC? So they know this, I believe, and I don't think CBDCs will be marketed to us. They're going to ask us our permission. Why would you think that?
Look, I believe that the power ultimately always resides with the people, whether you know it or not. Always. If you look at the past 2.5 years, it's important to recognize that there are many places and pockets in the world where none of that stuff happened, right? There are places and pockets. If you look, one great example is if you look at the USA, because you've got 50 different states and you've got tons of different cities and rural areas and so on. There are places that were completely normal for the past 2.5 years. No mask mandates, no vax mandates, no lockdowns, no COVID passports, no nothing, right? And if you look at the places where it went the furthest with the permission, implicitly or explicitly, of the people. In the places where it was pushed back against, they dropped it. They dropped it, or they clawed it back, or they didn't even try in the first place. So I think that if there is a strong enough level of resistance amongst the people, then I think particularly in the West, and it might be different in some other countries, but I think it has to have permission from the people implicitly or explicitly to function. That's my personal opinion. So that's why I use the term market, because I think that they know, okay, we can use the safety language and the security language to bring this to bear without too much resistance. Yeah.
You've never seen anyone in the public asking, we really need a central bank digital currency. Never come across anything like that.
No, but they will if you sell it to them the right way.
We've got to be vocal with our opposition.
I agree with all that. I'm a bit torn because I kind of agree with both Hass and yourself, Zuby, is that we probably don't have a choice, but I do think they will try to sell it to us. Like,
I believe there's always.
okay, yeah.
And I think if you don't believe there's a choice, then you've made your choice. What? The vaccination was a choice. Many billions and millions, hundreds of millions of people were coerced, but it's still ultimately a choice. Anyone get a gun put to their head? I know, I saw it. I saw it, trust me. I saw it. I was traveling through, I went to 8 different countries, I saw all types of coercion. But ultimately, fundamentally, it still remains a choice. I'm not saying all choices are easy, but unless someone's got a gun to your head, I'm not aware of anyone who was vaccinated at gunpoint. I know tons of people who are coerced or bullied or shamed or, all types of incentives, but ultimately it's still a choice. A hard choice is still a choice. And I think if people recognize that, especially en masse, I think the world would look very different.
I think that's important to recognize.
Yeah.
Equally hard choice for everybody.
Sure. I agree, and I'm not shaming anyone. I'm just saying that I think if you say that it's not a choice, then you've lost. If you don't even think you have a choice, then what's the point? Let's just take our let's just take our CBDCs then. If there's no choice and it's going to be forced on us, then let's just take it. What's the point of even trying to resist? And I think if you have that mindset, you've lost.
So we have a lot of, a show of hands, how many people would consider themselves part of I've heard that there are a few people here from the various Sydney freedom communities. Is that, yeah, okay, that's great. Obviously you guys are very warm to the prospect of Bitcoin, but I find that a lot of people in the freedom movements, they talk about freedom, but when it comes to the one fundamental thing, the most important thing that controls all their lives, a lot of them seem surprisingly resistant to the idea of Bitcoin. They seem to be still happy to use the government's money, even though, sorry? Right, exactly. So I was going to ask the panel, what are your experiences trying to convince people? What are you finding are the objections and the roadblocks, particularly when you're trying to convince people who should be absolutely jumping into Bitcoin with both feet, yet, again, as I mentioned, still insist on using the government's money when there's this absolutely perfect alternative available? You don't have to answer, you can pass it on if you don't have an answer for it.
It's the usual headline suspects. It's too volatile. It's bad for the environment. It's this. It's that. Nobody knows who created it. Well, unfortunately, it's been difficult to break through the mainstream counter narratives. But Bitcoin does speak for itself and stands on its own. And obviously it's off its all-time highs price-wise, but it's still a pretty substantial sized market. And it's something that's here to stay, and with time and with patience, more and more people will just come to the realization that the money is broken and we need something else, and the rabbit hole will eventually lead them to Bitcoin.
It's a lack of information.
Yeah, I think something that's really interesting when it comes to Bitcoin is how it's viewed around the world. So I think funnily enough, in our countries, in places like the UK, Australia, and the US, inflation is slow and imperceptible enough year on year that people don't really recognize it. It's this death by 1,000 cuts type of thing. If you go to Nigeria or you go to Turkey, it's pretty easy to sell people on Bitcoin, right? So those objections about volatility, about it not holding, compared to the Naira or compared to the Turkish Lira, it's clearly a better option. So I think one reason why it's harder to sell people in the West on the concept is because it's not quite as obvious just why it's necessary. And I think that will come in due time. I also think it's really new. It's really new. In my own lifetime, I've seen a lot of different adoption curves. I'm 36 years old. I'm not, a super old man. But I saw that adoption. I remember when people thought the internet was a fad or just a joke. I remember when people thought it was pointless to have an email address. Why? Because no one else has it. It's slow, so on. I remember when people thought it was silly to have a cell phone. Now everyone has a mobile phone and is highly addicted to it. But all of these things, I remember Facebook. I've been on Facebook since 2004. At the beginning, what's the point of this thing? It's stupid. No one's going to use it. No one's on it. It's slow. A lot of the same criticisms that you say. People used to be afraid to enter their credit card details online not that long ago. So if you think that Bitcoin is only 13, 14 years old, I think that perhaps we're being a little too impatient in terms of thinking that adoption is coming too slowly. Just a few years ago, if you even said the word Bitcoin, most people hadn't heard of it. I think now, even if they're not invested, people have heard of it, right? Even if they think it's a scam or it's a Ponzi scheme or whatever, they've at least heard it. It's got the name recognition. So I think another 10 years from now, let alone another 20 years, I don't think we should underestimate just how quickly things can change. And I think there's also a breaking point that's reached with any type of technology where it hits that mainstream adoption level and it very, very quickly becomes something that a lot of people jump onto. So I do think Bitcoin will go through that same adoption curve.
Yeah, this is what I get for speaking last, I guess. Everyone says all the right things before me. I'm really not needed here, but yeah. Then the pressure's on for me to make sure I say what they would say. I agree wholeheartedly. The classic saying I say to people is, everyone buys Bitcoin for exactly the price that they deserve to. And I've done it, and I've sold Bitcoin for prices that I deserve to, which I wish I didn't, but we all have it. And there's just an inflection point in everyone's journey, and it could be for a number of different reasons. And I agree with what you said earlier, John, and what I think one of the crowd yelled out. No one really knows how money works, so they don't really quite understand how bad it is. And to Zuby's point, here in Australia, we're rather sheltered because inflation isn't at 100% on year. It's at a measly 5%. But the reality of it is, everyone here knows that the cost of living is probably more than 5% than what it was 12 months ago. And it's probably only going to get worse. We're kind of at the top of the pyramid, not right at the top. I'd say probably the US is at the top. And so they'll probably be the last to lose or to crumble, but being at the top means you fall the furthest. So I do think whilst these other countries that you mentioned where hyperinflation is well within its journey, they're going to be the first to adopt Bitcoin and realize that that's the life raft that gets us off this. El Salvador is a great example. I went there 12 months ago. I'm going there again next month. And you go there and you're like, I can see why it works here. Whereas in Australia, there's no one really stopping anyone from tapping their card at the bar or going down to the grocery store and pay wave, and it just all kind of works. As much as the system underneath the hood is broken to its core, on the surface level, it works. We all get paid, we can all do banking. You can go basically to any bank and they'll throw a home loan at you, but that's not the case in other countries around the world. So it's a little easier to see why Bitcoin is so special, whereas in Australia, I think we're a little slow to realise that. But our time will come. And I think all of these types of events, like the ones that have happened over the last couple of years, are kind of little ignition points that everyone's like, oh, didn't quite think of that previously. Now I have a reason to. And then we're starting to see it. We're feeling it in our back pocket. Like you look at the petrol prices, you look at food, you look at everything. They're all going crazy. And I think we've been kind of sheltered for too long to think like, oh, it can't happen here. We're not Africa, we're not South America or all these other places where it's already a little bit further advanced. Again, not to be a doomer, but that is the way that the system is designed, and it has inherent flaws. And we can only sort of kick the can down the road so far before we catch up to it. And they'll probably try kick it again, print some more money, money printer go brewer. But eventually that model does self-implode. So I do think Bitcoin is that solution. Whether we realize that now or not is up to, I guess, all of us as individuals. But I do think that it's important that we do learn and we do understand how money works, why it doesn't work, what's good, what's bad. It was only Bitcoin that made me think of these questions. Again, I didn't get taught this at school. And if you do go to school, you get taught what they want you to know, not what you need to know. So Bitcoin is that kind of, that point that really sets you off on a different path. And if you continue to follow that path, I think that's the path that leads us to all the things that we want: freedom, self-sovereignty, all those things that are great about Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think one other factor to consider as well is the generation shift. So the world is run by older people. Like, let's be real. It's true. It's true. I mean, how old? Look at the USA. I mean, USA, Europe. It's run by older people, and there's going to be a generational shift with this. So whilst I can understand someone, most people who are 60, 70, 80 plus, with exceptions, they're not. It's going to be hard to sell them on almost any new and revolutionary technology, let alone as something that's as tricky to wrap your head around as Bitcoin or even other cryptocurrencies. But I think that, I've got 9 nieces and nephews, and they all know what Bitcoin is, and I've spoken to them about it, and actually it clicks for them more easily than it does sometimes with people who are decades older. It just makes sense to them. They're digital natives. They're growing up with the internet and tablets, and they know what all the social media is and YouTube and so on. So I think that as they become adults, the idea of Bitcoin and even just getting your head around it and adoption is going to become much, much easier with younger generations.
Thank you. Now, Brad, you had a quick point to add to that.
I do indeed. How many of you here have seen Black Mirror Season 3, Episode 1? Dystopian, totalitarian control of the digital currency. It's absolute horrifying. So that's what's in store if we're not careful. So as a bridge to getting toward a point of being able to use our Bitcoin freely, may I please invite you to all keep using this stuff as much as possible, because this is the stepping stone. If they can get everyone hooked on the convenience of the tap and the cardless, contactless payments using these, right, This one happens to be Bitcoin only, right? This does not go through my bank ledger. They don't get to see what I'm spending here. So make sure you do that as well. But curate your financial profile to give yourself the best profile possible, because it's all analysed, it's all algorithmically determined to see your suitability as a good citizen financially. So use this for everything that you don't want on the record. Keep doing that until we get to the point where you can just do that with Bitcoin.
So now we've got a few questions here that have shown up. Let me just wake this phone up again. All right, now so we're going to go to your questions. There's quite a few in here, so let's get started with that. So it looks like there's one here that's got a couple of upvotes already, so it's gone to the top of the list. So I'll read it out. My mum is against me dollar cost averaging BTC and wants me to save for a property instead. What should I say to make her shut up?
No worries, Mum. I'll do just that, and then just DCA anyway. Property really is a shitcoin, trust me.
I recommend a different approach. I don't recommend lying. I would just be 100% honest. But if you're an adult, your mother at some point has to accept that you are an adult and make your own financial decisions. I think firstly it's important to recognize that your mom is going to want what is best for you, and she's recommending that because I was just having this conversation with my brother earlier today, funnily enough. In previous generations, that was very obvious and wise and good advice that made sense for the vast majority of people, but the world is changing. But I think you just need to be honest. I would say just be honest with her and ask her to, just like you respect her, she should respect you. As an adult, it's your money. I'm assuming it's not pocket money that she's giving you, which you're then going and buying Bitcoin with. If it is, then that's another conversation. But yeah, I would just be real with her. And stack sats for her as well. Like, I've been buying Bitcoin for my parents since 2018, every month. So maybe you can convince her as well.
Yeah, I'm a big believer of dollar cost averaging. I think it's the ultimate strategy. I'm not a trader, so it's really easy to get on board with it. Yeah, so I think I agree with Zuby's points. Like, if it's your own money, then you should be free to do whatever you want. But it's an opportunity to have a conversation and to educate your parents about this sort of stuff. Perhaps they are a little bit naive to what Bitcoin is. They haven't done the research themselves. It's perhaps even a way to bond. I have had a bit of I'm sure this is not abnormal, but a disconnect between me and my family. My dad is much older than me. He was 44, I think, when he had me. And my brother is 14 years older. So there's a reasonable generation gap. And so I'm a bit of an outcast, punky sort of guy in the family. And so anything I do automatically gets kind of, oh, Chris is just off on his crazy thing, getting tattoos and doing gangster stuff. Clearly I'm not a gangster. But funnily enough, 10 years later, my brother is now a Bitcoiner. And yeah, I could not believe it. And he gets it, like, an insane amount. Like, I've got friends who have been involved in this industry for 10 years, and they don't understand it as well as him, which I just find mind-boggling because he was so against it just a few years ago. But he thinks, and I agree with him, that it's the best form of savings technology. And that's how he sees it. When the price goes down, he gets excited to buy more because he can't believe people are so stupid to get rid of it for the price that they're doing it. And I think it is a really good piece of savings technology, but it takes a flick of the switch in the mind to understand that. And the more you need hundreds, if not thousands of hours to get to the point where you truly understand all of the little bits and pieces of Bitcoin. I'm still learning. I'm still very much a learner. Even though I'm up here on the stage as a panelist, I'm still just like everyone in the crowd, trying to understand it, trying to navigate the space, trying to get all the little bits and pieces of information that upskill you. So I think it's an opportunity to have that discussion with your mother or your family members and try to get them on board. Try to be, you're not a salesman, but you're just having an open conversation about money, about how money works and what you want to do with yours and how you want to park it. And I agree with Hass. Property is a bit of a shit coin. it used to be the case 20 years ago when I grew up, got to get yourself a good job, go to university, get that white picket fence. And that's almost out of reach for most people in my generation, including myself. But I think, again, Bitcoin gives you an opportunity to get ahead again, to catch up from all the bad stuff that's happened in generations prior.
All right, thanks guys. Let me check the next question here. All right, well, I suppose I better ask it because it's gotten quite a few upvotes. So, Zuby is a trailblazing female weightlifter in a male-dominated field. Do you see yourself forging a pathway to breaking the glass ceiling for women in Bitcoin?
It's an excellent question. There's definitely going to be some confused people in here. Okay, well, to tell the story, back in February 2019, I temporarily identified as a woman and I broke the British women's deadlift record. This was a very famous tweet here. Did some serious numbers. I think it's got 4 million plus views on that. So I think that the glass ceiling has broken already. I think I've shown people what women are capable of when we put our minds to it. And so even outside Bitcoin and even outside the UK, I would like to think that I can be a role model of sorts. No. Hey, don't be a bigot.
All right, now, okay, so here's one I think that maybe you can all take a stab at, but what are the greatest threats to adopting a global Bitcoin standard at this stage of Bitcoin's evolution?
So you give me the hard one. All right.
That's because you can do it.
Maybe. I guess I could probably start on the point that I made earlier, is that in the West especially, the systems aren't necessarily completely broken. So that's gonna be deterrent for places like Australia, places like the US, the UK, all of the Western world. Is that and I agree with your point much earlier, which is that power is certainly with the people, but the people are scared. And they don't realise that the power is with them, especially so here in Australia. I feel like we don't quite understand how much power we have, and we're a little bit frightened to take that step out take that leap of faith that we can actually band together and stand up to the authorities. So we're not really pushing the needle in that sense. Yeah, I think I do. Like else.
The risk is that even though we kind of convict and certain, the risk is that others won't make that leap. They won't come to understand it.
Not until it gets more painful. It's going to have to get more painful for people, and I do think that is around the corner for us here in Australia. There will be, people losing their houses, losing their jobs. It's already happened. It's going to get worse, and people are then going to go, "Where's the government now?" We're a very overruled country here in Australia. We've got rules for everything, and to your point again, safety and security, we buy into that really easily here. Perhaps not in this room as much, but as a general population, we kind of buy into that. We pass some really terrible laws, like the Assistance and Access Bill that allows government and police officers to essentially go into any software development company and put a back door into it, and if they tell anyone they've done that, they'll go to jail. Like, it's crazy stuff, and you know what they say? We've got to do it for the kids. Who's going to protect the kids, There's pedophiles out there, and by no means am I supporting pedophiles, but that's the kind of language that they use to push these things through. Sure. But yeah, that stuff kind of frustrates me a little bit, is that we don't seem to have a bit of a backbone here, is we're pushovers. And I wish we kind of stood up to that a little bit more and realised that we do have the power. But until then, we're going to continue to get,
Yeah, to second what you said there, I think that complacency and fear, I think that people collectively are going to make a choice. I believe that technology always provides a fork in the road. I believe that technology allows increased freedom or decreased freedom, right? If you think of any technology, you can use it as a tool and you can control it, or you can allow it to use you as a tool and it can to control you. And I think when it comes down to the money that we use and how we buy and financially transact, you've always got an option. We're gonna have, we're at a time now where we've got two obvious technologies here. You've got CBDCs and you've got Bitcoin. What's your choice? I see, one of these technologies allows for greater liberty and greater autonomy and greater sovereignty. And one of them is more of a prison. And I think that people are going to need to decide. I feel the same way, by the way, about artificial intelligence and robotics and a lot of different things, smartphones themselves and social media. You can choose whether you use it or it uses you.
Before you answer, so I'll ask this next question because it kind of ties in with what we've already been talking about, and as you can add to this. A lot of comment is made around governments not being able to control your bitcoins. Are we certain that governments can't blacklist wallet addresses for trans? I presume that means transactions, not transgenders. So, so that might be considered a risk that you can assuage the...
So, like at the software level, like the government can't do anything, but the government can put a gun to your head. So I suppose they can control your transactions if they want to, put a gun towards your head.
That was my question. Can I elaborate?
Sure.
So the way, I guess, at the moment we work with Bitcoins is, for example, I could have a card with Bitcoin in it. I come here to GSBAR, right? I scan it. So there is a transaction made. You could say that transaction was made in Bitcoin, but you've got central authority controlling that transaction, right? So you've got a medium of exchange. You've got, let's say, you've got a wallet with Binance or Coinbase. So they are kind of converting that Bitcoin to fiat to facilitate that transaction in the backend. So what a government could do is always blacklist your address so that these mediums of exchange do not process that transaction for us.
So in a world of centralized services, that is definitely possible, and like the government would have full power to like blacklist your addresses and all that kind of stuff. But if CheersBar was running BTC Pay Server, there's very little that the government can do. So at the software level, there is no threat to Bitcoin effectively. It's more at the social layer.
Am I right in saying that the Chinese government did try to ban Bitcoin a couple of years back, multiple times? I mean, I'll be honest, I think if the CCP can't do it, then good luck to any other government.
Yeah, I agree. It can't be banned at the software level. It's had literally everything in the kitchen sink thrown at it over its 14-year lifespan. And I think if it was going to be shut down, it would have been shut down now. China banned Bitcoin mining. A lot of the hash rate was there. Thought, oh, this is going to spell the end of Bitcoin. It just moved. Like, it's designed, it's so beautiful. It's like a piece of artwork that I'm not even into art, but like, I imagine someone who goes to an art gallery and looks at the Mona Lisa like, oh, I'm so overtaken by this beautiful piece of art. That's how I feel about Bitcoin. Like at every single layer and every single ingredient that makes up Bitcoin as a whole is just perfectly fine-tuned to how it needs to be. And I think it's just, yeah, I think I'll just leave it there. I could just go on for hours about how much I love it.
So while we're with you there, Chris, someone has asked you, what is the Bitcoin hardware market looking like in Australia? Is it gaining popularity?
Unfortunately, probably not as much as it needs to be or should be. People are still very much reliant on these centralised service providers like exchanges. So again, it's a lot of education. Most people everyone comes from the traditional finance area where all of that is done on our behalf. You go to a bank, they handle all the security. They just give you a nice fancy card with your name on it and you go and tap it. Whereas Bitcoin flips that on its head. It says, well, we're going to remove the bank and we're going to put you in charge. And most people don't like that responsibility. They get kind of overawed and overwhelmed by the fact that, oh, if something goes wrong, I'm to blame. Whereas if my credit card gets skimmed or my bank account gets hacked, I can put the blame on the bank. They'll reimburse me and I'll live another day. So there is a big education element to that, is to getting people to understand the responsibility that's involved with owning Bitcoin. And I've been doing that for 6 years and I feel like I still haven't put a dent into it. I wouldn't know. But yeah, having those realizations that the future, and to the question prior, where can it be banned? It can if we continue to rely on these centralized service providers. But if we take things back to the original, abstract of the Bitcoin white paper, a peer-to-peer digital cash, no one can stop that. No one can. You can run your own node. You can do. Not everyone needs to do that, of course, but hash rate is more or less decentralized. There is nothing any government or state actor could do to censor a Bitcoin transaction on the peer-to-peer level. And things like Lightning Network and all of these other advancements help make that reality.
Thanks, Chris. Now, this is quite a general question, and I think it's one that our panelists could elaborate on for many hours, but maybe try to keep it brief, just a quick overview of this. But someone's asking, regards BTC, BTC will do to dollars what the internet did for, I think he means communication. How do you see future developments? So layers, services, BTC banks, mining and energy. So I think the thrust of that question is, I think a lot of people have this idea that Bitcoin is sort of old tech because they're only looking at the bottom layer, when in fact it's designed to be very minimalist at the bottom layer and have abstraction layers on top to do much more more sophisticated things you want to do. So just maybe some quick comments, some quick overview from the panel as to what those additional layers are.
Sure, thanks for thinking of me, Hans. The best analogy that I've heard about this is actually from a friend of mine, Alex, who said a couple of years ago actually, he kind of used the comparison of Bitcoin as like the base layer of the internet protocol, so TCP/IP for instance. And when the internet was created, people thought, we can make our own internet, like a private internet. AOL tried, all these other people tried, and they ultimately failed because the open and decentralized protocol won. Now, no one really knows what TCP/IP is. Why do we need to? But it is like the foundational layer that other protocols have then been built on top of it, like SMTP and HTTPS and all these other things that only nerds really need to know about. But what we end up getting in reality is things like email, websites, URLs. Like who would use the internet if we had to go to Google but type in 192.153. There's a protocol that handles that. And I think to John's point, Bitcoin is that bottom foundational layer, and we will see subsequently over time things like the Lightning Network and whatever else gets invented built on top of the Bitcoin layer to give us those nice usable tools like email, like real-time communication, video calling, payments, all that sort of stuff that's been built on top of the open and decentralized protocol.
Yeah, sure. I won't talk about layers in the tech specifically, but I want to again reiterate how important it is to understand just how new this technology is and how early we are. I mean, we're talking just over a decade. Again, if you think about the internet. If you think about what the internet was like when it was first starting out and you first were going on HTML pages, maybe using some very clunky and slow. I mean, even when I was in school, right? I mean, if you wanted to, even when they started bringing in things like, remember that, I'm a musician, so I remember when people were downloading music and stuff, but you put the song to download and wait overnight for the song. And this is just in the early 2000, late 90s, early 2000s. So many of the things with Bitcoin it's new. So, people, it's slow, it's this, it's that. Now, that will all be addressed over time. I don't have the technical chops to know how to do it myself and know all the ins and outs, but there are very, very smart people all across the world working on this, and this is really we're still so early in the game, and I think it's so important to stress that.
Yeah, agree, super early. And just like if you were to ask somebody in 1999, how do you think the internet is going to look like in 2022? That's basically what you're asking us to answer. So nobody knows what Bitcoin is going to look like in 15 years. You know, like itches will be scratched, and like things will be built. But like I can give you a prediction that Bitcoin will win.
17 years ago, iPhones didn't exist. Smartphones didn't exist until 2006. Now it's that.
Well, it's an interesting point because I think it makes the propagation of Bitcoin as a technology much faster than what the propagation of the internet itself or the hardware that the internet runs on had to be. It took how long did it take? The internet was what started in 1968, the 60s, and it didn't become mainstream until the 90s. But once you've got that there, things that then run on that can be adopted much more quickly. Now, there's an interesting question that came through here. I'll just wake the phone up again. This is, can the upcoming sovereign debt crisis become government's too big to fail event? The mobilisation of savings and retirement funds under national security. Is that something that you might be able to comment on, Zuby? Or is it a bit out?
I feel that might be a bit out of my depth.
Yeah, all right. Well, we can.
Out of my depth as well, but like if we look to the third world, the solution has always been bail-ins. So the government just mobilises the money of the people.
Did we introduce a bailing law?
Yeah.
Yeah. There we go. So, certainly possible. Let me break for a while.
The bank never goes broke.
That's right. Okay, well, do you... Oh, it just moved out of my field of view there. Question. Do you think that a faster adoption of Bitcoin results in a higher risk of society breaking down? It reminds me of that Reddit post, did you remember that? There was a Reddit post about a guy claiming to be a time traveller. Yeah, you could talk about that. So do you think a faster adoption of Bitcoin results in a higher risk of society breaking down? Would a slower adoption rate be better for the world at large?
No, I think we're all on the clock. The faster the world goes Bitcoin, the better. And if society is like going to collapse, it won't be because of Bitcoin. Yeah. So look, the majority of the problems that stem, from the world, that stem up are due to a broken monetary system. It's basically as easy as that. You work hard all day, you slave away all day, you save the little money that you can save, and it just gets inflated away year by year by year. The only antidote is fixing the money. And at this point in Bitcoin's life, it's looking like quite good that Bitcoin may very well be that antidote. So it's currently an antidote at the local level, but I do feel that given enough time, these things just take time. Like as Zuby was saying, the world is run by old people. There's a lot of old people. There's lots of headwinds that Bitcoin faces, but at the same time, there's also a lot of tailwinds at Bitcoin's back that helps it keep moving along. If somebody told me when I was getting into Bitcoin, in 2013, that it would reach a $1 trillion market cap within the next 10 years, like I would have laughed at them. So even now, at whatever it is, $300 or $400 billion, Bitcoin is a legitimate financial monolith. It's no longer a joke. It's currently moving into prime time. A little patience will go a long way.
Actually, Chris, there's a tailor-made question here for you, unless you do want to.
I'll blend them in.
Yeah. All right, let me give you the question here. So, Chris, no, we had that one. It was, yes, what's the best phone wallet for Orange and
That's a good question. I'll just wrap up on that previous point. It's funny the question says, is Bitcoin moving too fast? Bitcoin often gets touted as moving too slow.
I think they're asking if it's preferable for it to move faster, so could it result in societal damage and collapse?
Right. I see Bitcoin as like a turtle. it'll be there at the end of the race, whilst all of the other runners who might be fitter and faster have fallen off the wagon and couldn't make it to the end of the finish line. So I think it's good that it does move slow in terms of a development standpoint. But in saying that, we need to rip the Band-Aid off as well. The longer we kind of slowly tear it and we're like, oh, we don't want to feel pain, at the end of the day, there's going to be pain. And the quicker we rip the Band-Aid off, the quicker we can start healing. And I think Bitcoin is that antidote that does help us heal faster. But yeah, don't get me wrong, it's going to hurt for a lot of people. Whether that happens now or it happens in a few decades, I'm not sure, but historically speaking, and I'm not an economist and I don't certainly look at history that closely, but every single fiat currency in human history has gone to zero. Eventually. There are obviously some that still exist today, but it seems a little bit naive to think, oh well, the US dollar's the exception to that rule. There's literally been thousands of currencies in human history, and they all don't exist anymore. So to think that the Australian dollar or the UK pound or the American dollar is the exception to that rule seems a little bit silly. So whether that's now or it's in the future, I'm not sure, but it's going to happen. To the software wallet, I don't particularly recommend any in particular, but obviously ones that are Bitcoin only are great. But one that gives you the option to hold your own keys is of course good, but I'm a hardware guy, so I recommend hardware wallets over anything. I usually say it's kind of like a sliding spectrum between convenience at one end and security at the other. And so it's up to you to determine where you want to slide yourself in that. So if you want to have your Bitcoin extremely accessible, easy to use, in the palm of your hand, you download a software wallet from the App Store and your convenience is right there. But you're trading off security for that. And so you should know that if you want that level of convenience, perhaps it's not wise to put all your Bitcoin on that particular wallet. Maybe use it for spending at local merchants, or if you go to El Salvador, you can spend it anywhere, but you'd never put your entire balance in a software wallet because it has inherent flaws. So for things like that, you slide yourself across to the security level. And to get more security, you're trading off convenience. So it's really up to you. You can go to any degree you want. And I usually say it's determined on how important that Bitcoin is to you. So if you've got 0.001, then you just stick it on a Lightning wallet on your phone and use it. But if you've got 10 Bitcoin, it's probably worth getting a hardware wallet and thinking about your security. Yeah, again, there's no right and wrong answer. I always say this when I help consult people. You could split up your recovery phrase, your 24 words, into 24 different locations in 24 different countries. You could do that. There's nothing wrong with that. That's extremely secure. But imagine you need to recover your phrase. You've now got to fly to 24 different countries. Well, yeah, especially if we have lockdowns and all that sort of stuff as well. But, you could do that. But I wouldn't do that for $50. I'd do that for maybe like 50 trillion, if I had 50 trillion, right? So, again, slide that scale across to where you feel the most comfortable.
Here, is there a spectrum of decentralization? I'll just go to the... Can there be a spectrum of decentralization, or is it an all or nothing concept? And his bracket, from a nation-state attack perspective. Who wants to have a go at that one?
What was the question again?
So the question was, can there be a spectrum of decentralization, or is it an all or nothing concept from a nation-state attack perspective? So is it like, is it one of those things like, can you be a little bit pregnant?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question to answer.
Well, we're saying that, I think I sort of understand the idea that, is there, well maybe I'll ask a different question. Is there a benefit for something that can be, is there such a thing as something that's partially decentralized? Would that be beneficial?
Well, I think decentralization in itself as a concept is a spectrum, right? On one end, you have something that is 100% totally centralized, housed in one location. right? Or you can have something that's spread across 4 locations is more decentralized than that, and so on.
So if we take it from a nation state perspective, is it therefore only the fully decentralized version as opposed to one that might only be partially decentralized, because it's vulnerable to a nation state?
Partially decentralized, what's the other part?
Well, that's
decentralized.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That would be my view too.
Okay,
I think
interesting.
we've answered the question there pretty comprehensively.
Yeah, I mean, what are we protecting against? So if it's a state actor, what are their resources, right? So something that has 4 servers that cost $50 a year to run, probably not very resistant against a state actor. But something like Bitcoin that has millions and millions of hardware and hash rates spread all around the world, I think that's adequately decentralized. I don't think you can always get more decentralized, but then where's infinite end? Like, there's no end to infinite, right? So it's just, what are you trying to protect against, and is it adequate against that? And I think Bitcoin has proven itself to be adequate against pretty much every attack it's had, every attack it has had, it still exists. So
This will be a fairly quick one to answer because I think we've all sort of heard this one before and have a pretty good answer for it, but I'll put it too in case people haven't heard it. How do we know that Satoshi Nakamoto isn't the CIA and Bitcoin isn't a psyop?
Satoshi may very well have been CIA. Doesn't matter. He wrote some software and put it on the internet, and his job was done.
Yeah, look, with things like this, I think the honest answer is you can't know 100% with certainty, but we all have options and we make choices. And I think it's important to recognize that everything has a risk profile. Absolutely everything, right? So when people say that Bitcoin is risky or so on, it's like, well, compared to what? If you hold all your money in dollars or pounds, or you're going to be losing, you know that it's going to be getting deep, every decade or so it's going to be losing, up to 50% of its purchasing power. Everything has a risk. Every investment, everything has a risk. So I don't think while these things are interesting ideas to float around, I don't know how useful it ultimately is spending your time wondering if Satoshi Nakamoto was a CIA agent and if Bitcoin is, you can go there if you want, but it's like, well, what's the alternative?
yeah, it's a rather pointless exercise. As much as we all do want to know the real identity of Satoshi, we may never know. And I think there's some beauty found in the fact, I don't want to know. Like if someone said, you can come to this room and no one else can hear you and we'll tell you who he is or who she is, I'd probably say, no, I think I like not knowing. Like that's part of the, like I said before, all the ingredients fine-tuned, that's one of them. The fact that there is no central leader, there is no one that we can point the finger at, send a cease and desist letter to. Like it's beautiful. It's beautiful the fact that no one created Bitcoin, or we don't know who created Bitcoin. It could be the CIA. They have a history in creating this type of software. Things like the Tor network was coming out of the NSA. So it's entirely possible, but it is a beast beyond that individual or that group at this point. And whether it came from the CIA or not, the CIA can't stop it. So I think that's the important point.
I also think that if they're that freaking smart, then yeah, they deserve to get us. If they're that good, like, you know what I mean? If back in 2008 they were like, all right, this is what we're gonna do, and 14 years from now, they're gonna be sitting in Australia. There's gonna be like these enthusiasts, and we'll keep. I don't think so.
Now, I think we've touched on a number of these aspects already, but I think I should ask the question here. So Oxpower asks, if we had to move quickly to set up a BTC parallel economy in our freedom communities, what stumbling blocks might you predict we would need to strategize for? Yeah, well,
I said egos. The thing about people who are into Bitcoin, of course, is that by definition, we tend to be more liberty, freedom, minded, more independent, more self-sovereign, and so on. So I do think people would absolutely work together. I joked when I said egos, but I think there's something to that, right? I think that the human element of everything can be the trickiest part, right? You have dealing with all different types of personalities and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think the human aspect would be the trickiest part, but I think that could be managed.
Well, we have some use cases around the world of little localized communities that have adopted Bitcoin. So I use El Salvador as the example. Bitcoin Beach was one area in El Zonte on the coastline of El Salvador where Bitcoin just, like a local guy just said, let's just start building a circular economy in literally this small beach town that has, I don't know how many people, a few thousand maybe. And it swelled from that point onwards. So I would implore you, if you have the opportunity, go visit some of these places. I'll be going there again in November, and I'm also going to be going to another place in Guatemala where this has happened too, on a lake there. I forgot the name of what the lake's called, but they've done the same thing there, and they've started, merchants have started accepting Bitcoin, like literally just people on the street, like selling food in a little store have started accepting Bitcoin. And it's very localized, and then it just kind of blows up from that point onwards. So if you have the opportunity, go see some of these places, see what it's like. Obviously, we're not going to see that here, to some of the points I made earlier. Like, we don't need that per se, as much as I think we should have it. Our economy works. So it's going to be these places that experiment and have sort of nothing to lose, so to speak, like El Salvador. They don't have their own currency, they don't have set their own monetary policy. What have they really got to lose by adopting Bitcoin? Maybe it'll be a failed experiment. We're back to square one. Whereas in Australia, if we were to do that, there's a lot less to gain in the short term and probably a lot more to lose. So we're a little bit hesitant to do something like that here.
Okay, so we've only got about 10 or 15 minutes left, so what I might do is, for a couple of these questions, I might just sort of put to who I think will probably answer it best. Particularly this one here. Once all Bitcoins have been mined, who will keep the network safe working? I think that's a pretty easy one. You can handle it.
Same people as today. The miners will keep it going, and an equilibrium point will be reached between the cost to mine a Bitcoin and the price of Bitcoin, and everything will be okay.
So the contention, though, is once they've all been mined, what's the incentive? What's the incentive?
So the cost to capture those transaction fees will mirror the price of a Bitcoin, and the equilibrium will go back and forth, and then the equilibrium will be reached, and everything will be okay. Don't listen to the fee FUD. Everything's going to be okay.
So that was actually one of the original debates that came up with why the block size was kept small. One of the reasons, there were a lot of other good reasons as well, but one of them was so that there would be a competitive fee market remaining after there was no longer the incentive for newly minted Bitcoin. If you had had an unlimited block size, then of course with a greater supply of available block space, there wouldn't have been any competition to get transactions in there.
So I'll add to that. So this problem isn't going to be a problem for about another 20 years or so. If there's not enough transactions on Bitcoin in 20 years' time, then Bitcoin deserves to die. Effectively. So in 20 years' time, the blocks will be full 24/7, probably full of the nature of the transactions will probably be opening, of channels, payment channels up on second layers and all that kind of stuff. It will be completely intolerable to use Bitcoin as, layer 1 Bitcoin. At that point, you're probably using, layer 3 Bitcoin, and an equilibrium will be found, and everything will be okay.
All right. Any one of you can pick up on this one, but it's an interesting point, and I think I've not got an answer to it, but I'll leave it for the panel. What is stopping Bitcoin being digitally printed or rehypothecated and have its value pushed down or controlled? Yeah? Yeah. So maybe if I modify that, what could we all do to make that more difficult to happen?
So self-custody is, so for example, there's, for every dollar of physical gold, there's $100 of paper gold. And most likely for every dollar of Bitcoin, there's probably 10 bucks worth of paper Bitcoin. Now, the advantage that Bitcoin has over gold is it's very easy to take custody of it. So eventually, if enough people, take custody of their Bitcoin, these rehypothecation games will be harder to play. But for now, I'm absolutely under no illusion. If you have any Bitcoin on exchange, so let's say I have one Bitcoin on an exchange, it is being loaned out at 20 to 50x.
You don't have to tell me to support self-custody. That's what I've been doing for the last 6 years. But I agree. Taking it into control of your own hands it's quite a moving moment when you first own Bitcoin, because generally you buy it on some central exchange and you're all excited and you're giddy. But removing it off the exchange and putting it into your own wallet, ideally a hardware wallet, it's quite a moving moment, because you've then taken complete control and you have self-sovereignty at that point. And up until my journey in Bitcoin, I don't think I'd ever had that other than physical cash in my pocket. But no one really uses cash these days. As much as I agree with Brad, we should. We're moving away from that, and you can see that with merchants refusing cash. So yeah, definitely take self-custody of your own Bitcoin. It's quite a special moment.
Thanks, guys. Now, this is more of a general question. It's not necessarily Bitcoin related, but I think it's one that people would like to hear the answer to, and it's for Zuby. And Anonymous asks, Zuby, how did you sell thousands of albums independently and gain so many followers? What did you do to get there? So, without revealing your trade secrets.
No, I'm happy to reveal my trade secrets. So I traveled around the entire UK, every town, every city, and I stood out on the street and I talked to hundreds of thousands of people one-to-one, and I sold my CDs. I sold tens of thousands of CDs hand-to-hand prior to any internet blow-up. So that's how I thank you. Yeah, so just literal legwork. Just being out there all day, every day for years on end, talking to people, shaking hands, getting rejected, getting ignored, making sales, getting love, getting hate, repeat, repeat, repeat.
Couple of technical. Apologies if your question maybe hasn't been specifically asked, but it's more than likely because we've covered it in another question. A couple of basic technical questions have popped up here. Maybe you guys just have a quick tap at it. They've been asked. Do hardware wallets require Bluetooth or an internet connection in order to allow incoming and outgoing transactions? Are there risks with this?
Yeah, sure. There's lots of different hardware wallets, and they all have different ways of connecting to some type of software so you can interact with it. Hardware wallets are just signing keys. They're just the key to the vault in the cloud that opens up your particular Bitcoin wallet. So you do need to pair that with some interface of some degree, more or less. But using like Bluetooth, for instance, most people probably, and I imagine the questioner is probably thinking of something like the Ledger Nano X, which is one of the most popular hardware wallets that does have connectivity via Bluetooth. At the end of the day, nothing can force or replicate confirming a transaction by pressing the physical button on a hardware device. That's what makes it so special at the end of the day, is that if someone is hacking you, whether that's your mobile phone or your computer, they can do whatever they want, but at the end of the day, the final thing to confirm a transaction on a hardware wallet is the physical press of a button. And they could be in anywhere in the world other than in that room with that hardware wallet, and they can never confirm that transaction. You can be fooled into confirming a transaction that's fraudulent. That's very much possible. But at the end of the day, you cannot replicate a physical press of a button. So double check all of the information is correct before you do that, because there are certainly ways people can intercept and do man-in-the-middle attacks where they, you think you're copying one address and you're pasting it, and in between that action, the clipboard has been altered, and you copy one address and you paste a different, and you don't realize like, oh yeah, cool, copy, paste, let's go. And you physically press that button, it's game over. But if you double check, and the hardware wallet will never lie, it will always have the true address that it wants to send to. Whether you've entered the wrong address, that's social engineering and your own mistake. But yeah, double check, triple check that you're always sending to the correct address before physically pressing that button.
All right, so just quickly, there's a couple of others here. Thoughts on the Lightning Network? That's almost a complete topic in and of itself. We could have a whole evening on that, as we do in our Bitcoin Sydney meetups. But just quickly, it is the scaling solution to Bitcoin, very briefly there.
So yeah, I like Lightning. Lightning's great. It's not the be-all and end-all. There's going to be other similar things to Lightning pop up in the future. I'd encourage everyone that hasn't experimented with Lightning to experiment. There's some great. We were talking about orange pilling newbies with software wallets. So a good software wallet that I like to use to orange pill noobs is Moon Wallet, MUUN, and that lets you play around on Lightning without any knowledge, without running any nodes, without anything like that. As we were saying earlier, Bitcoin's still very young. Lightning won't be the only scaling solution that comes to Bitcoin, but I do feel that it has a bright future ahead of it.
Look, there's a few other little questions, but I think what we might do is leave those other sort of more detailed technical questions and encourage you to attend meetups and speak to the Bitcoiners who are in the room here tonight about that as we mingle after we finish the panel here. Otherwise, yeah, look, I think that is there anyone else who has any, maybe just some brief questions who didn't use the slide? There's a question at the back, yeah?
Yeah, can I just ask Zuby, firstly, thank you for your logic and reason the second half of last year, in particular for us here in Sydney. It made a huge difference to my family, and I've got 2 teenage boys. Honestly, it was what we were feeling. You articulated beautifully in each tweet, and it was much appreciated. That October, November, September, we all know what we went through the second half of last year, so thank you. My question goes to... Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
I think you took, from my perspective, you took a little bit of heat on Twitter last year saying that when to move on from a country, I think was your perspective. If those around you don't see, and we're in a city of 5.5 million people, and this is the room we've got tonight, it's not huge. So there's a lot of people who think differently to the people in this room. And at what point do you decide to move on? And I think us as Australians, we see, particularly this room would see, the CBDC coming, ESG coming, all the craziness probably in the next 10 years. And where's the point where you stand and fight for your country? And my father escaped communist Yugoslavia in 1954. There's a history there, and at what point do you decide to move on? I'd appreciate your...
El Salvador.
Yeah, that's a huge question right there, man. And it's something that's definitely been in a lot of people's minds, I think probably more now than ever. I think that the first thing to say is that it is very much a personal choice and decision. Everyone, I recognize, has a different situation. Some people are single, some people are married, some people have families, some people don't, some people are self-employed, some people are entrepreneurs, other people are employed with it. There are just so many different factors, let alone financial means and so on. My honest recommendation for everybody is to maximize your options. Make sure you have options. I don't think, especially as you said, especially given the past couple of years we've lived through, I think now more than ever it's important to recognize that you don't want to just have one option of city or country that you can be in. It totally makes sense if you are born and raised in a country and you really feel strongly with it. It totally makes sense that you may want to, that you would ideally want to stay there, live there, have your family there, die there, and so on. Maybe even have multiple generations live on after you. But as you've alluded to, I'm sure your father felt the same way about Yugoslavia, right? And I think that it's wise to give yourself the options even if you don't have to exercise them, right? I think by the time, if it truly got to a stage where it's like, holy crap, like the totalitarianism is here, and by that time it's too late. By that time it's too late, right? You want to be able to, I mean, I'll tell you what I did myself. So I left the UK in May last year. I actually cut the lease short on my apartment. I remember the day I called my parents and I said, Mom, Dad, I don't think I can live in this country anymore. I need to go. I then phoned my landlord and was like, hey, I want to cut my lease short. What can I do? And that came after the third lockdown. After the third lockdown, which was the longest one, and the one that I got caught in because I was traveling and dodging the other ones. It's the one where they shut down the gyms, and they actually in the UK did what Australia did, and they made it for a while illegal to leave the country. For me, that was it. That was the final straw. I don't plan on ever living again in the UK after that. So I get asked where I live all the time. I don't live anywhere. I just constantly travel, and I have some things that make that easier for me to do. And it's not a nomadic life I recommend for everybody. I understand it's nice to have some types of roots, but in short, it's a personal choice, and I can't answer that for each individual because I don't know their situation. And number two, regardless, I think it's wise to at least have a couple options. If you don't have that yet, there's steps that you can take over the next few months and years so that you are both mentally and financially and physically prepared just in case.
Well, I think unless someone has another urgent question, I think that's been about an hour and a half. I think we might wrap the panel there and thank our panellists, Zuby, Hass and Chris.